Good day, ladies and gentlemen. So once again, thank you for taking the time off to attend this virtual event with OSRL on Beyond Visual Line of Sight, BVLOS, Unmanned Aerial Vehicles, UAV, Operations, which is brought to you by the OSRL Surveillance Core Group and Aviation Team. This webinar will run for approximately 30 minutes, leaving ample time for questions and answers later. So please use the question and answer function of this live event to submit any questions that you may have along the way. With that, I shall move to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Firstly, we have yours truly. My name is Matthew, and I have served in OSRL since 2011. And I'm currently a duty manager working out of the Singapore base. In addition, I am also serving as the current chair of the Surveillance Core Group, where we strive to have our eyes on the latest technological developments on all things surveillance related. With me today, I have Adrian, who has served with OSRL since 2014 and is currently serving as the Aviation Liaison Officer in our Singapore base as well. Adrian has since been involved in several oil spill incidents and exercises both locally and overseas. Adrian is also holding the role as Aviation Liaison Officer and is responsible for managing OSRL's aviation assets and capability in the Asia-Pacific region. As part of this role, Adrian has been involved in the management and integration of UAVs into oil spill response to explore how they could be best utilized to enhance OSRL's capability and for the wider industry and for our members as well. So let's start this webinar proper. As we know, UAVs, sometimes also referred to as Unmanned Aerial Systems or UAS, or I'm sure we are all familiar with the commonly used vernacular, which is drones. As we know, UAVs represent a very effective option within our surveillance toolbox in helping to give us that all-important situational awareness on which we base our response decisions on. And while we will not be delving into the details of UAVs today, we will be focusing on an aspect of UAV operations that has the potential to greatly enhance their utility in a response scenario. And that is beyond visual line of sight, which I will refer to as BVLOS for the purposes of today's presentation, BVLOS operations. So our presentation today will focus on, firstly, I will give you an general overview of BVLOS UAV operations, what it's all about and what it entails. Next, we will talk about some of the experience that OSRL has had with BVLOS operations, where Adrian will be talking to us about OSRL collaboration with one of our BVLOS capable UAV service providers, and also share a little bit about future projects concerning the use of aviation assets and also UAVs, and also involving BVLOS capabilities in future projects that OSRL will be working on. We will also be talking about a quick recap of how OSRL members can access UAV capability through OSRL. Not only OSRL members, but really anyone who wishes to activate OSRL's oil spill response service. And finally, we will move to a question and answer session. So firstly, it's good to set the record straight. What do we mean exactly when we say BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight? So a simple definition of that is BVLOS is defined as the UAV flying beyond where the pilot or any visual observer can see. And it's important to mention that when we say someone can see, we are talking about them seeing the UAV unaided. So which means no telescopes, no binoculars to aid your vision. Having said all that, we know that this definition can also be subjective because one person's, for example, eyesight may be better than the next person's eyesight. Visibility can also be affected by a multitude of environmental factors, obviously fog and other weather events. So general guidelines, what we know as visual line of sight, so not beyond visual line of sight, but visual line of sight, is up to 500 meters away from the operator or the drone pilot, UAV pilot, and that is where UAV can fly up to 500 meters away from the pilot, and that is the realm known as visual line of sight. And of course, this means that the drone pilot must be able to see the UAV that he's operating at all times. There is a next category known as extended visual line of sight, or EVLOS, and that is a scenario, a type of operation where the drone pilot may not necessarily be able to maintain visual contact with his UAV at all times, but can be aided with the assistance of a second person, a second or third or fourth person, as many other visual observers as are necessary to support the drone pilot. So basically, the drone pilot is aided by additional observers to maintain visual line of sight of the UAV. And of course, the visual observers, we would expect them to have some form of communication system, walkie-talkies or some form of radio system that they can communicate with the drone pilot and warn him or her of any hazards or obstructions in the area where the UAV is being piloted. And finally, if we move beyond the realm of EVLOS, that is where we get into the realm of beyond visual line of sight, BVLOS. So basically, there are no humans, no operators, no visual observers associated with that UAV operation who are maintaining constant eye contact with the UAV. So that is what we mean by beyond visual line of sight operations. The technology for BVLOS already exists today, and it's good to talk a little bit about the rules governing BVLOS operations. So it's good to know that the technology already exists today, and a lot of the off-the-shelf UAVs or drones that are actually you can get off the shelf or get at a local hobbyist store. They can be BVLOS capable, which means they do have the technology to be able to fly at that range and beyond where a human observer can see. But as we know, having the technology and capability to do something is not enough, as we also need to consider the risks involved and manage them well. And that is where the rules and regulations come into the picture. So what kind of rules and regulations are we talking about? Obviously, they will vary in all the different countries around the world. And UAV operations or drone operations are usually regulated under the Civil Aviation Authority or the equivalent authority for aviation within each country. So some of the rules and regulations that we will commonly see, definitely there will be additional control measures. They will definitely, usually, most likely include degrees of autonomy, which means that the UAV must be able to make its own decisions based on the data that it collects. The sensors that the UAV collects about its environment must be processed, and it must have algorithms to govern how it will react in the event that, for example, it detects an obstruction in the way. So it must be able to make autonomous decisions on its own without human intervention. And of course, dependent on the level of risk involved with the operation. So risk can be, for example, a classic risk would be flying over uninvolved persons, flying over any other human's head, any other human's heads or property, and all of these people who are not involved with the UAV operation. And of course, more complex operations. Like, for example, flying in areas where there are other flying objects or even manned aircraft using the same airspace. So the level of risk will be dependent on some of these factors. And of course, based on the level of risk, you would expect to see a proportional number of control measures to mitigate all of those risks. So in a general sense, that is how the rules governing BVLOS operations, you can expect them to be laid out. Obviously, again, I say the rules can be different in every country that we can operate in. Definitely will be different in Singapore versus another country. So some of the typical requirements, and these are just examples. As I've mentioned, software for autonomous navigation The UAV must be able to make decisions on its own without human intervention. A very common requirement will be detection and avoidance capability. So again, that's along the lines of when we talk about autonomous navigation. So without the operator intervention. Another very common control measure required is loss of uplink contingency. So the UAV must be able to respond and bring itself back to safety, either land itself safely or bring itself back towards the operator in the event of loss of uplink, of data uplink. And of course, contingencies for loss of power or loss of sensors that could impact navigation. And that last point is really just purely due to the fact that there is no operator or there's no human eyes being able to tell that there's something wrong going on with the UAV when we're doing beyond visual line of sight operations. And of course, all of these rules and regulations will be like stage gate system will be in place in the form of permits. So the local aviation authority will issue permits to basically tell you whether it's okay or not, and do your control measures meet up to the required standards when you're flying BVLOS. So having said all of that, this slide is intentionally on the generic side, as when dealing with regulations. There are variations in every country that we may operate in. So rules and regulations would best be handled by the UAV service provider that operates locally in that country where you're looking to operate. And of course, with support from the contracting party. So the contracting party might be yourself if you're operating, doing business, having operations in that country. And the best person to advise you on this would be a local UAV service provider that is BVLOS capable, and they should be able to tell you what are the control measures that they have in place as required by local rules and regulations. So this is just an additional slide to give you a little bit more context. This is just an example of a risk assessment framework. So this excerpt here, this picture, is taken as an example from the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore. Taking a risk-based approach, you can see low risk, medium risk, and high risk, and the level of risk basically changes with what kind of assets that the UAV is flying over. So for example, low risk is where you're not involved in flying over any uninvolved persons, and medium risk is where you would be flying within the proximity of uninvolved persons, and of course high risk is where you expect to be flying over uninvolved persons. So perhaps more urban areas, those would qualify as high risk. And of course, with the level of risk, there are different categories of requirements and control measures that will be required. So as you can see, you have the basic level, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And of course, the number of requirements and control measures increase with the risk category. So very simple model. And you can expect to see similar models, not exactly the same, but definitely similar models in many countries around the world. From my personal experience, I understand that a lot of the aviation regulations around the world are fairly well aligned. UAV regulations are something that are obviously trying to catch up and coming, but hopefully we will see a lot of UAV regulations be fairly aligned across the globe as well. So having said all of that, basically when we talk about oil spill response operations, flying over seas and oceans, as is the case, as is largely going to be the context when we do oil spill response operations, we want to survey offshore environments. So flying offshore can be relatively low risk from a BVLOS point of view, in the sense that you likely will not be finding lots of people offshore. Mostly it's open seas. So in that sense, you can expect the number of requirements to not be as stringent as some of the more higher risk types of BVLOS operations. However, the same cannot be said if we are thinking of a shoreline application, UAV operations have also been proven, as we all know, to be very effective in surveying shorelines as they are effective in surveying offshore environments. So a shoreline environment might be more challenging in the sense that you may be flying over uninvolved persons. Okay, so talking a little bit more about BVLOS applications in oil spill response, what can we expect to see? Firstly, definitely, because of what the name suggests, we would expect to see more advanced hardware, definitely more advanced, sometimes even larger than what we can expect to find at a local toy store or a hobbyist store. Okay, something else, another feature that we may see more commonly, it is maybe more common to start seeing more fixed wing options. Fixed wings options are known for better power or fuel efficiency. So sometimes when you get into the larger size of UAVs or drones, you start to see the drones using fuel rather than battery packs, as is common with the smaller drones like DJI that you can buy from the store. So more fixed wing options versus rotary types of UAVs due to better power or fuel efficiency versus rotary per unit distance. Having said that, you can of course also find large UAVs that are also using rotary or helicopter style designs as well. Definitely, because we are talking about BVLOS, they have longer range and gives you the ability to access difficult to reach locations without having to get your pilots close to it or your responders close to those locations. Some of the larger UAVs as well, definitely you start to see them move into the realm of being navigated using satellite uplink as opposed to radio uplink, as is the case with most of the smaller UAVs that we see today. And of course, what does BVLOS applications? The most obvious benefit for BVLOS as in oil spill response is, again, in addition to giving us greater access to difficult to reach locations, longer range, of course, it also represents that potential to replace manned aircraft in terms of endurance and capability. And of course, the benefit of replacing manned aircraft it's got nothing to do with BVLOS, but really any type of UAV operations where you can replace a manned aircraft is, of course, you don't put people at risk. You don't have to deal with a human in an aircraft and having to manage all the risks involved with putting someone into an airplane, and also the risk of having the pilots in the airplane. And of course, without people there, naturally the endurance of any aircraft will be extended as well. So the technology does represent great potential for us, and that's why we are looking to BVLOS operations as an area of growth and an exciting area of development in the future. So the next section of the webinar, I will hand over the time to my colleague Adrian from the aviation team, who will talk through the rest of the presentation. And in the meantime, again, please feel free to submit as many questions as you have, and we'll try to tackle them at the end of this session. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. Good day, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Adrian Tan, the Aviation Liaison Officer in OSRL. So I will now talk through the OSRL capabilities with regards to UAV application, more specifically on the BVLOS developments within the company. So considering the advantages that UAV could bring to oil spill response, OSRL has actually made agreements with several UAV providers to provide a local, regional, and global UAV capability. These agreements are executed on a best endeavors basis, however, with predefined terms and agreed rates. So in addition to that, with defined procedures and known capability, mobilization times can be greatly reduced in times of response. Operating UAVs commercially can be a very complex operation with a lot of permissions required and regulatory requirements that need to be met. So through regular exercising and collaboration, we could utilize their expertise and experience to gain assurance that UAVs can be used effectively and efficiently with standardized output and deliverables. So as recent as late last year, to explore the benefits of long-range UAV, OSRL have actually signed an agreement with Flylogix, who is actually one of the few operators in the UK operating under commercial permissions from the CAA for BVLOS operations. They are capable of offering fully integrated package, removing the complexities of remote operations by arranging the risk assessment, regulatory requirements, permits, data gathering and processing, as well as post-mission reporting. With an operating range of 500 kilometers, the aircraft is capable of reaching over 95% of UK offshore oil and gas assets from 4 mobilization hubs around the UK. Their fleet of aircraft can actually carry a broad range of payloads, including FLRR, optical cameras, LiDAR, radar, and gas sensors. It also has a duplex satellite link that enables information to be passed back and forward to the payload at all times. Now, with fully equipped ground state control station, BVLOS operations are monitored centrally with multiple redundant communication links to the aircraft, ensuring the data can be provided securely in real time. So prior to the agreement, in November 2019, the Flylogix team actually conducted a demonstration flight for OSRL, mobilizing the aircraft from Tony Island, UK. This included demonstration of live video feed, image capture, and dynamic search patterns. The UAV used was actually a FX2 fixed-wing aircraft operated from the ground control station, which was a modified Mercedes Sprinter van fitted with HCTV screens, communication links, and power supply to enhance situational awareness with the ability to share operational data in the real time. So nonetheless, the demonstration was really successful and also highlighted areas where it could benefit OSRL and our members, particularly in spill identification, quantification, and prolonged monitoring missions, as well as aerial deconfliction project. A few seconds ago, I actually highlighted on the aerial deconfliction project. So now you may wonder what is it all about. So just to share, OSRL is actually currently embarking upon a project to understand the complexities of manned and unmanned aircraft operating in one area in a safe and controlled environment. This project will allow for safe and effective planning for future spill responses should the inclusion of UAVs operating BVLOS be required. Working alongside the aircraft and UAV operators, engagement with the CAA, air traffic control, and other stakeholders is imperative to understand the full process of implementing the use of UAVs. Obviously, safety is the number one priority for all OSRL and all stakeholders. This project is broken down into 3 phases, where on completion on each phase, a stage gate assessment will be completed before obtaining approval to move on to the next phase. The first exercise is actually scheduled to take place in September 2021, with scheduled completion at the end of 2022. So do take a look out for future updates on this exciting project in the near future. So next, you may wonder, how is this additional UAV service be accessible to OSRL members? As mentioned, OSRL has actually signed agreements with several providers to ensure the geographical coverage is as extensive as practicable. These providers are actually leaders in the unmanned aircraft industry with vast experiences operating in oil and gas environment where safety is paramount. Once the need for UAV is identified, OSRL will then make contact with the pool of service providers, leveraging on their network and expertise to either tap on local partner or be mobilized into country in accordance with customs, immigration, quarantine, or in short, CIQ requirements. The provider is expected to look after flight permissions and operational planning in compliance with local regulatory requirements. Where necessary, OSRL will need members' assistance in supporting the CIQ requirements for the personal movements, as well as is in the expedition of relevant flight applications. Nonetheless, as Matthew has elaborated on the flight application just now, UAVs can be a very complex operation with varying regulations across all countries and regions, and it will be prudent for our members to plan and exercise to establish their Tier 2 or Tier 1 or Tier 2 UAV capability to ensure a more seamless mobilization during a response. Further, OSRL will be more than happy to participate in such exercises to develop and enhance the integration of UAV, especially at current times when more and more stakeholders are increasingly looking to reduce the movement of people and offshore-related risk exposure. Now, with this, we have come to the end of our presentation, so we'll quickly move on to the Q&A session.
Cool. Thank you, Adrian. So there you have it, everyone. It was a short and sweet session, focusing specifically on BVLOS operations for UAVs. Just another reminder, if you did come up with any questions along the way, do submit them using the question and answer section, question and answer feature. So the first question that to handle today, this is a question posted by, I think, looking at the case in Nigeria. So the question is, how many drones would be required to monitor a pipeline network of about 5,000 kilometers long, as is the case in Nigeria? Okay, so pipeline survey, that is obviously another application where UAVs can be very helpful, especially when you're talking about long pipelines. 5,000 kilometers long is indeed quite a significantly long stretch of pipeline. So thank you for this question. In terms of how many drones would be required, it really depends on what type of drone you're using, what specification of drone you're using. 5,000 kilometers can definitely be covered by a single drone. Of course, it depends on the kind of drone. If you're talking about the larger types of drones, if you go more advanced towards the military grade style of drones, which are fuel powered, that we see on TV a lot, those can definitely do thousands of kilometers, and 5,000 kilometers would be no problem for UAVs such as those. But for more commercial purposes, you would be looking at the more civilian kinds. But I understand there are UAVs that can operate at that kind of range as well. So the technology does exist, and really the answer to that question is, firstly, you would have to look at what kind of UAV or drone you can have access to, based on the service providers available in your country. And if they don't have a single UAV or drone that has that capability to fly so far, then perhaps you can explore using several UAVs, perhaps flying out of intermediate base stations and being programmed on a daily or a weekly flight pattern to really survey the sections of the pipeline that you would be interested in. So yeah, really it depends on the types of UAVs that are available to you. And that will be something that is best, you can have a discussion with your local UAV service provider. So I hope that answers that question. Yeah, because of the large number of UAVs available today, it's hard to give a definitive answer on that. Okay, the next question, I'm going to read it out. Is it necessary for UAV to be explosion-proof UAV in high risk or high hydrocarbon vapor operations? So is explosion-proof UAVs necessary for flying in potentially flammable atmospheres? That's the question. And the answer to that is, based on my knowledge today, there is no such thing as intrinsically safe or explosion-proof UAVs. Having said that, we all know that UAVs can be flown in potentially flammable atmospheres. For example, UAVs have been used in refineries and also in offshore installations, oil rigs, for inspection purposes. So definitely UAVs can still be used. However, they are not intrinsically safe. And the reason that they can be flown or operated that way is basically UAVs that fly in these environments can be equipped with gas monitoring capability. So with the gas monitoring capability, the UAV will be able to detect if they are flying into an area of high hydrocarbons or an area that is potentially flammable or flammable atmosphere. And of course, in the event that the UAV detects or the gas monitor attached to the UAV detects that there are hazardous vapors or flammable vapors, that would be an indication for the UAV to leave the area. So that is the way UAVs are operated in flammable atmospheres using these types of control measures. Another piece of information, I also understand that usually the risk of sparking when operating UAVs, obviously the sparks is what's going to cause potentially explosive conditions. The risk of sparking is usually present at the startup phase where the UAV takes off. So the UAV starts up and takes off, begins flying. That is when usually the risk of sparking is present with the UAV operation. So obviously to mitigate to mitigate the risk of the spark, basically something that is very commonly done as well is the UAV takes off in a safe area and of course returns to a safe area rather than taking off in the middle of the area where you could have potentially flammable vapors as well. So these are two control measures that can be used to navigate UAV operations in high risk or potentially flammable atmospheres. So the next question that I can see here, how many hours of operation can you typically get? Thank you for the question. Again, this is a very difficult question to answer because there are so many different kinds of UAVs available in the market today. And of course, the flight time and flight endurance of each model of UAV can be varying. I just give you an example. For example, off-the-shelf DJI UAV. Some of them, obviously, DJI makes some very good UAVs. Some professional companies use DJI drones as well, or UAVs as well, for inspection services for the oil and gas industry. They're basically at that level of technology where they can be used professionally, although you can actually buy them at a local hobbyist store. So, I mean, some of these DJI types of drones, per battery pack can fly for about 15 to 20 minutes. And of course, you just after the battery runs out, you can always swap batteries. So you can fly for as long as you have batteries. Obviously, going for more advanced UAVs, they can be customized, having larger battery packs, and they can fly for a much longer time. So I think the baseline you would be seeing to fly for a minimum of about 15 minutes. And of course, if we are talking about BVLOS UAVs, we can go for, if you're talking about the larger types of UAVs, fuel powered UAVs, those with fixed wing platforms, and looking to fly many kilometers away, definitely the number of hours of operation will be increased accordingly to cater for the types of operation that they would be operating in. So thank you for that question.
All right, I think there's a question on regarding this last slide is it meant for OSRL or for a member or mobilizing party? So the last slide was actually about some of the recommendations that OSRL would recommend our members to do, that is to establish or to develop and exercise incorporating UAVs into like exercises such as shoreline or offshore. So this is to really ensure that we can have an established local UAV capability locally. As you all know, applying for permits and approvals in some countries or areas can be really complex and it takes time. So this is why we are recommending our members to establish like a tier 1 or tier 2 UAV capability that we could tap on to use in the times of response, so as to reduce the mobilization times to deploy UAV providers from other countries. And there's also another question on, do you have any experience detecting or monitoring oil spills at sea? So at present, we haven't really actually deployed UAVs during a spill incidents. However, we have actually tested and deployed UAVs for an oil and water exercise, which we have exercised it back in 2017. So based on this exercise and its output, the deliverables are really promising. We are able to sort of detect the sheens that were released into the water. And back then, there was also a live feed showing the live stream of the monitoring of spill, or rather the sheen on water, back to our common operating picture. And yeah, we're actually looking forward to test out these UAVs internally as well as externally as well. So which is why bringing back to my previous point, we would really encourage these exercises to be conducted on a regular basis so that we could sort of enhance the deliverables from these UAVs.
Right, there is another question here saying, where is OSRL UAV, UAV capability or UAV base in Africa located? I think Adrian, would you like to answer this one? This will be concerning the OSRL partnerships with UAV service providers around the world.
Hi, Matt. Yep. Sorry, I was just a bit confused with this question. So, we do actually have an OSRL base. However, it's not an operational base. It's a dispersant base that we have over there. But then we do have agreements with service providers that are located in Africa. So if you're interested, just feel free to email any of your duty managers and we will be happy to assist you with any queries that you might have in Africa.
Okay, and the next question that I can see is there a best in class currently globally that can be looked to for the leading standards operationally? So I think you're asking about it, whether there's like a globally best practice or best in the class standard that we can reference. And the answer is I'm not aware of anything like that, because every country will have their own regulations, and we will need to be compliant to those regulations within every country that we are operating in. However, having said that, I also mentioned earlier that I can, based on my experience, that a lot of the regulations are actually quite similar, quite aligned, especially those of the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA. That's the US Aviation Authority, and of course the European standards as well, or EMSA. The standards of EMSA, they are more or less aligned. I've looked into some of the regulations, and I can see a lot of similarities. So basically, I guess if your UAV capabilities can meet either FAA or EMSA or even UK regulations, maybe even Australian regulations, I know they're all very similar. If you can meet any of these regulations, chances are going into a different country. If you find yourself in a scenario where you're taking capability from one country to another, if you were doing that, chances are the capability would be recognized or would be compliant to the requirements in the other countries as well. Having said that, again, usually countries also have their own pilot certifications that they issue from each aviation authority. So that would be another consideration to have. So if you had a pilot's license from Singapore, probably will not work for you if you went to UK, for example. So that would be another thing to be cognizant about as well.
All right, I think there is a question on who's responsible to apply for a permit and getting the approval from the local authority to bring in these drones into the country. So one of the reasons why we engage external companies to operate UAVs are actually because they do have the experience and the expertise as well as the knowledge to actually carry out the permit and regulatory applications so that they could be deployed in country. So to answer your question, so this responsibility actually lies on the UAV service providers because they are the expertise in the operational planning, such as the preparation of safety case, where in areas that are rather complex to run UAVs. So yeah, the responsibility lies on the service providers.
Okay, the next question that I can see. So the question is, have you looked at using UAVs in the water during a spill for fluid sampling / VOC monitoring? So the comment is, using an aerial and marine UAV in tandem would be a powerful monitoring tool. So thank you for that question. And I would firstly agree with you. Yes, using a UAV in the air and coupled with data gathered from the sea, as well, if you're talking about a marine oil spill, offshore oil spill, would definitely be a powerful monitoring tool. So when you're talking about UAVs in the water, that is something that OSRL has looked into as well, and we do have experience in that area as well. But we don't refer to unmanned vehicles in the water as UAVs. We call them autonomous underwater vehicles, so AUVs. I know sounding very similar to UAVs, but AUVs are in the water. So we talk about these devices in the water as AUVs. So AUVs are definitely the type of thing that we can deploy under the surface of the water. And they come with a standard suite of, they come with different sensors that we can customize, but very commonly they would have, for example, dissolved oxygen sensor, fluorometry for the detection of oil droplets in the water column. That is especially useful when we are applying dispersants offshore and we can detect the concentrations of oil which has dissolved down into the water column, which has mixed into the water column because of the use of dispersants. And of course, AUVs, they can be autonomous as well. We can give them a pattern to travel along and coordinates to travel along, and we can program, the operator can program them to take different types of different depth profiles going up and down within the water column to collect data. And basically, when they surface at the surface of the water, they can then transmit the data that they have collected and via satellite uplink, and that can be received at your emergency emergency operation center. So the technology does exist. They're called AUVs, and definitely using AUVs in tandem with UAVs, which gives you that surveillance capability above the surface of the water. Using that in conjunction, AUVs and UAVs can be a powerful surveillance and also a monitoring tool as well. So yeah, so definitely this capability does exist. And you can also access AUVs through OSRL.
All right, so there is a question from Eric. Would you consider BVLOS for individual ship pollutant emission enforcement? So to understand, to answer you, so obviously long-range UAVs are suited for prolonged monitoring missions and early confirmation of pollutants, reducing the burden on more costly manned assets such as manned aircraft. So however, to fly BVLOS, we still require the use of segregated airspace to ensure sufficient separation from manned aircraft traffic. And this process would actually require reasonably long lead time to process. So if we could overcome this by leveraging on the expertise of service providers for the preparation of safety case and the preparation of risk assessments, we could certainly benefit from the deployment of BVLOS in this scenario. Of course, not other than that, we could still consider the use of normal UAV to take advantage of remote monitoring operations as well.
Okay, I think that is all the questions that we have for today, and yep, that is all the questions that we have for today. So again, I would like to thank everyone for attending this session. Again, this recording will be placed on OSRL's website, oilspillresponse.com. So do feel free to go over there and look up our webinar, our collection of webinars. This session will be there, and as well as the other webinars that we have hosted all throughout the year, and some of them from last year as well. The entire list will be there, and feel free to have a look at them based on your level of interest. So again, thank you for attending this session, and wish everyone a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you and stay safe, everyone.